Hello, hello, my fellow geeks. This is the Indian AvGeek, and I am Vishal Mehra. This is our 10th episode, and I wanted a geek of geeks to turn up for the show this week. And boy, do we have someone special. Satyaki Raghunath is the Chief Operating Officer of the Bengaluru International Airport. He's been with the airport for over 6.5 years now, but you'd want to know where all this Chennai boy has been. He will tell us in detail in a little bit himself, but quickly, he was with Leigh Fisher for 12 years and then with Dubai Airports, and then he went to Stansted for a bit and joined GMR in Delhi after that, before moving to Bangalore. I did tell you, Geek of Geeks, right? Welcome to the Indian AvGeek, Satyaki. They've been shouting from rafters for you on X.
Hi Vishal, it's great to be here.
Let's start with a bit about your background in aviation, Satyaki.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many people, I think I got into aviation accidentally. A very serendipitous accident, of course. My first degree, I grew up in Madras. My first degree was in architecture. And when I finished architecture school, I worked for a couple of years before applying, like all kids those days, to the US to do a master's. And I ended up in grad school in Berkeley, where I was part of a research group that focused on aviation. And that was a joint research group between the FAA, the University of California, a couple of other universities, Boeing, and a few other firms who were industry partners. And I did a fair bit of work on delay and capacity at some of the large hub airports in the US. And as I was finishing my graduate program, a consulting firm called Leigh Fisher reached out to me and asked me whether I would join them. And I think at that point, it was such an interesting aspect to be able to work on aviation project.
Year?
This was 2002.
All right.
And
this is just after 9/11.
Yeah, just after 9/11. In fact, I was in grad school when 9/11 happened. And I was in class when the news came on the West Coast. We just started class, and it was quite dramatic, and it was quite shocking. And so I joined the aviation industry in the aftermath of 9/11. And I spent the first 3-4 years in the US working with Leigh Fisher on a number of projects for airports and airlines, looking at a range of different things, facilities and operations planning, primarily given my background, but also doing some work on financial planning. And then I moved with Leigh Fisher to London to set up the European practice and then head the Asian practice. So I was in London for about 10 years. So I was in consulting for about 13, 14 years till about 2015. And then I joined Dubai Airports as head of master planning. An ex-colleague of mine was working there and he reached out to me. And so I joined Dubai Airports to head master planning for both DXB and DWC. Did that for a bit, and then I, for about a year and a half, and then I came back to India because the Indian aviation story was also very interesting. And I joined GMR as Chief Innovation Officer, looking at digital transformation and capacity and expansion at all of their airports. And then the lure of coming back closer to home and the south was too much. And I came back to Bangalore, which is the second home for me because half my family is from Bangalore and I have a lot of extended family here. So I came back to Bangalore 7 years ago, and I've been here ever since at Bangalore Airport.
Terrific. You are at the helm of one of India's most successful airports, the Bangalore International Airport. A great Indian aviation story, if I may say that.
So I think Bangalore Airport has been a great story since its inception. As many people know, it's a greenfield airport. It was conceptualized in the late 90s. It was concessioned out in 2004, and the airport was constructed between 2004 and 2008. And the first flight commenced on March 24th, 2008, which is essentially the equivalent of our founding day. And I don't think the original investors and promoters of the airport would have even thought how successfully the airport would eventually turn out to be, even in their wildest dreams. Because the master plan of the airport that was developed originally had a 2-runway system catering to about 45 million passengers at the end of the concession period, which, by the way, was 30 plus 30 years, so 60 years. And the fact is that by the time the airport was built, that is the first phase of the airport was built in 2009, the airport had a capacity of 12 million passengers. And in the first year, there was 9 million passengers from a traffic perspective. When we celebrated our 10th anniversary, we catered to 27 million passengers, which meant that traffic had tripled. And then we went up to about 33 and a half before COVID, of course, hit. And we had 2 or 3 terrible years. And last year, we finished at 37.5 million passengers, which is quite phenomenal. And I think over the course of the next decade, we expect to grow to well over 80, 85 million passengers on the 2 runway system, which is sort of the equivalent of Heathrow or a Dubai or any major airport in the world that you can think of. And I think if you look at our traffic numbers this year, we will finish September tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And in the first 6 months, we've crossed 20 million passengers. And looking at seasonality and things like that, I think that this year we will be in excess of 41 million passengers, which is quite incredible considering where we started off. So I think it's been quite the growth story. We've had a terrific growth in both domestic and international passengers. Domestic passengers are growing at about 10-11%, and international passengers are growing at about 12.5-13% over the course of the last year and a half. And there was a period between 2015 and 2020 where we were amongst the fastest growing airports in the world. And we had a compounded annual growth rate of about 20% during that period. So I think all in all, Bangalore airport, along with some of the other airports in India, I mean, Hyderabad, Delhi, Mumbai, etc., are probably very, very good examples of what the Indian aviation story has been all about. The fact that in 2000, I don't know whether you remember this, but in 2002, 2003, when I first started working in aviation in Asia, if I'm not mistaken, Indian Railways, and if you looked at Indian airports and Indian Railways, the total amount of passenger traffic in India, I think, was 13 million passengers for the year in those days. I think it was in 2002 or 2003. I can't remember exactly. And Indian Railways carried 13 million passengers every day. That was the difference. And today we are a market well in excess of 300 million here in India. And I think that tells you all you need to know.
Satyaki, you spoke about this incredible growth that the airport has witnessed over the past decade or so. What's been the secret mantra? What's driving this growth, and what are you guys doing to attract this growth?
So I think we've been doing all the right things. I think firstly, I mean, I don't think we should take all the credit. I think part of the credit is due to the fact that Bangalore is located very centrally in the southern peninsula, and the 5 South Indian states have phenomenal growth figures. If you look at the growth across the 5 South Indian states, from a GDP perspective, they contribute to over 30% of India's GDP. And that means that the middle class growth, the service sector growth, etc., has been incredibly amplified in the south. And Bangalore benefits from that. Bangalore itself has been one of the most cosmopolitan cities in India for a very long time. I mean, even when I was growing up, it was one of the most cosmopolitan cities. And the fact that the tech sector, the service sector, biotech, aerospace, etc., have been here historically has certainly helped. And finally, I think we've had the right direction as far as leadership at Bangalore Airport has gone in terms of making sure that we set the right objectives, making sure that we deliver to our vision, which is to ensure that we create the capacity at the right times, provide world-class infrastructure, and do various things to, allow people to travel, make sure that we create meaningful experiences for them, and touch lives as the gateway to India, or the new gateway to India, as we like to call it. So I think over the last 10 years, we've focused on creating capacity. And that has meant that we've invested in a new runway, which was opened just before COVID, the new South runway. So we are the only airport besides Delhi to have 2 independent parallel runways in India. And that's been a huge benefit. We've opened Terminal 2 in 2023, as you know, and that's added capacity significantly here at Bangalore Airport. We were already growing tremendously before that, and I will say that the growth between 2014 and 2020 was probably the one of the largest spurts of growth that we've seen. And I think most of the airlines realize that South India is a fantastic market. Bangalore is a fantastic place to be based. The airport does the right things with respect to its partners, who are the airlines, the concessionaires, the wider ecosystem. And I think that has also been a huge part of why we've been successful, because we treat all of our airlines and treat all of our concessionaires as partners and not necessarily as vendors, and uh, you know, and treat them very fairly and equally. So I think that that's helped as well. So it's a combination of making sure that we had the right objectives, the right vision, and putting the capacity in place. And I think that's what has led to the growth. Of course, built on a very strong foundation of a city that's uh, very, very cosmopolitan, very, very travel oriented. And the fact is that GDP per capita numbers for Bangalore are some of the highest in the city, some of the highest in India, sorry. So that's also been exceptionally helpful.
And I think what's also been helpful is the way you guys have built the airport. I have to say, I love the quad. I absolutely love Terminal 2. I don't know anybody who's been there who doesn't. Let's dive slightly deeper into this. What kind of split you're seeing between aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue?
So a few years ago, we were probably closer to 75% aeronautical and 25% non-aeronautical revenues. And today we are 65% aeronautical and 35% non-aeronautical revenues. And the interesting thing is that I think that will continue to evolve over the course of the next decade or so, because over time, I think the goal for most of the airports, and I think for the sector in general, is to get to a stage where we make sure that we make so much non-aeronautical revenue that we can absolutely do away with the aeronautical charges. I mean, that's the ultimate objective for most airports in the world, which is that you make so much non-aeronautical revenue that the charges become insignificant or irrelevant, because you can do away with them. And that's the sort of, let's say, the holy grail. And if you ask most airports in the world, they will tell you that they want to get there. I think this pattern will continue to evolve for the next decade or so. I still think aeronautical will be between 60 and 65%, simply because of the growth in the Indian aviation sector and the fact that we have so much capacity. So passenger traffic is continuing to grow at 12, 15%. So aeronautical revenues will continue to be dominant. But I think after that, after the mid 2030s, you will see a significant shift of what that split is. And I think in an ideal world, we would like to get to 50-50 at least in the long term.
All right. Let's get aeronautical for a bit. Let's talk your biggest airline. Let's talk IndiGo, right? 370 aircraft, I think, last I was checking in the fleet. They're strengthening connectivity from the south. There is, of course, congestion at Delhi and Bombay airports, which would seem to benefit you, which would seem to benefit some other airports as well. What kind of conversations are you having with IndiGo as far as their operations in Bengaluru is concerned? And you, of course, have one of their MROs as well in the country.
Yeah, so I think, Vishal, great question. Firstly, IndiGo has my deepest admiration. I think they're a magnificently run airline. They always have been. They've focused on making sure that they build scale while keeping things simple. They built a wonderful network across India. They've made sure they've got the two things that are very, very vital for an airline to succeed, which is frequency of service and cost. And regardless of what anybody else says about everything else, I think those two are the two most important factors in making sure that airlines are profitable. So they've got a great control on costs. They've got the best frequency of any airline in India by far. And I think that has historically contributed to them to growing to this scale. And I think they've got about 370, 380 aircraft today. They've placed this huge order, not just for narrow bodies, but now wide bodies as well. They're changing their model to also have a quasi business class, which goes into effect, as you know, from next month onwards. So all fantastic parts of the story. But I think what IndiGo realized, certainly in the period between 2014 and 2020, was that South India had been massively underserved. And I think along with in what used to be in those days AirAsia India, those two airlines really focused on increasing their presence at Bangalore and at BLR airport. And what they did was significantly start connecting Bangalore to different points in India. So if you look at their network today, they connect well over 65 cities from Bangalore non-stop. And they have built that very, very, organically to start with, but now they're growing in scale. They've got 40 aircraft based here at Bangalore Airport, and that number is only likely to grow. We've had great conversations with them always. They're a tough airline to work with, but tough in a good sense, in the sense that they know what they want. They sort of focus on keeping things simple. And I think the management team there has been fantastic to work with. Peter, Abhijit, Rajat, Wolfgang. All of them have been very, very open, very, very committed and passionate as far as aviation is concerned. And I think their vision for what an airline needs to be in this part of the world in terms of connecting places, making travel easier, all of those things is very, very admirable and very uplifting. And I think there's absolutely no surprise on my at least from my perspective as to why they've succeeded. And also the promoters have been very supportive and great. So they've grown significantly in scale. And I think what they've done now is that they've got unprecedented connectivity from Bangalore to all parts of India, as I said. What that has also meant is that they've then been able to increase their international services out of Bangalore. So today, as we speak, they do about 12 departures per day, 12 daily international departures per day out of Bangalore. And interestingly, they are our biggest carrier internationally as well in terms of seats, not in terms of ASKs, but certainly in terms of seats. And that number is only likely to grow. They've really been very, very bullish about Bangalore. They're very bullish about markets across India, not just Delhi and Mumbai. And I think they were the first to realize the potential of South India and take full advantage of it. And now with all of their departures on their own metal, as well as the fact that they've now code shared with 7 of our international carriers. So they code share with Air France, KLM, they code share with Qatar, Qantas, British Airways, JAL, and Virgin. It's meant that the network is strong. They do a lot of feed into our other international carriers as well. So I think it's been one of the most interesting growth stories in India. I think it'll continue for a long time. I'm very hopeful that it'll continue very long. And our conversations have been very optimistic. They've got an MRO already here. We've been talking to them about what their plans are over the course of the next decade. And I think many of our infrastructure plans, even from our perspective with respect to expansion, etc., have been predicated on the fact that they've told us how much they're going to grow over the course of the next decade or so, and they have a clear idea. And I think you will see that not just in Bangalore, but I think across India. You will see it in Delhi, in Mumbai. I think they've signed up to be Noida's home carrier as well. So I think you will see it in Noida. You will see it in some of the other airports, Hyderabad, so on and so forth. So I think IndiGo is going to be dominant regardless of the airport in India.
From one airline which has MRO at your airport, let's talk about the other one, right? Messrs. Air India is going all guns blazing as far as its expansion spree is concerned. Campbell Wilson has mentioned that Bengaluru will be the third hub for them in the country. What are you doing to make that happen and make it easier for Air India to work with you?
I think that's been one of our more interesting stories as well. Again, I think ever since the Tatas took over, there's been a very different level of commitment as far as what the vision for Air India needs to be, and the fact that they are doing this transformation process. And every time I've spoken to either Campbell or his whole team, Nipun, a number of other people in Tata Sons, etc., I think the commitment, that passion, etc., comes through in terms of what their vision and what their ultimate goal for Air India is. What I think was very interesting when they first started talking to us was the point that they were making about the fact that they want to connect India or Indian airports and Indian cities to different parts of the world without necessarily losing traffic to the Emirates and the Singapore Airlines through Dubai and Singapore Changi and other places. And they wanted to connect as much of India non-stop to different parts of the world as possible. And I think in the first part of that is strengthening their hubs at Delhi and Mumbai, which is logical given the size and scale of those cities and those airports. And then obviously they were also looking out for what else they could do again in South India, which, as I've said before, has been historically and tragically underserved. I think for a long time, the fact that South India was a huge contributor to GDP was overlooked, and most of us had to connect through. If you wanted to connect through an Indian airport, we had to connect through Delhi or Bombay, and I think that has meant that many of the foreign carriers took on those roles of serving as our hub carrier. So if you look at Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai or Kolkata or anywhere, I think the Gulf carriers and SQ became our default uh, go-to carriers. And I think that's something that Air India has really sought to change. From our perspective at Bangalore, I think there were two or three things. One was we were the first airport. I mean, again, we've got the fact that we've got 35 million passengers, growing to 40 million this year, is very attractive because it means that there's already substantial scale and size here at Bangalore Airport. The second thing is that we were the only airport, like I said before, Delhi, which had two runways, which is a huge part in terms of making sure that we have capacity over the course of the next decade or so when all of their aircraft are coming in, and that's very critical. And associated with the fact that we had the capacity was the fact that we had world-class infrastructure. So it was not just the fact that we had the capacity, but also the quality of that infrastructure. So whether it was a Cat 3B Code F capable runway, which is what we opened in December 2019, or the new terminal that you spoke about, which is Terminal 2, and the fact that we were trying to create a world-class experience on par with anything or even better than anything that passengers have seen in the world was something that was pretty attractive to them. I think the fact that Karnataka and Bangalore also had a very strong aerospace heritage, which I think most people know about but forget subconsciously,
Yeah.
also played a part. So I think the fact that HAL, ISRO, DRDO, etc., have historically been in Karnataka has meant that from a labor perspective, Karnataka is a great place to be if you want to be an aerospace company. And I think that has also played a part. And the government of Karnataka, I can't tell you how helpful they've been in order to make sure that this happened, because they sat down and also spoke with Tata Sons and Air India, telling them about what their vision for aerospace was going to be here. And the fact is that they, worked with them on some incentives and things like that. So it meant that the package came together perfectly. We had all of the ingredients, we had the market, we had the traveling public, we had the scale. And I think from a Tata perspective, AirAsia India, which was sort of one of their earlier companies, had been based in Bangalore. So if you remember, we had always been a substantial base for AirAsia India.
Yeah,
and I think that also helped because they had a fairly strong ecosystem here. So I think all of those things came together. And I think to be fair, our team here worked incredibly hard for about anywhere between 14 and 18 months to make this happen. People don't realize how difficult it's been, but it was a long, hard slog. And we got to the phase where we were able to do that. So I think it was the culmination of a lot of effort.
Recently, IndiGo announced a new route from Bengaluru to Mauritius, and I think there is also a similar long, narrow body route IndiGo operates out of your airport, which is to Bali, and I hear it's been going great guns. I just want to know and understand a bit better what's usually your process like whenever you're speaking to airlines about opening these new routes. I do understand most of these decisions, of course, are taken by the airlines network planning team also, but what's usually your role? What is usually the airport's role in facilitating that and giving data, etc., etc.? What role your team plays in all of this?
So I think again, a very interesting question, and one we try and keep under the radar most times, but I think I should talk about it today. I think we've got the best airline marketing team in the country. We've really worked our socks off over the last 5-6 years to make sure that we've got as much point-to-point connectivity to both short-haul and long-haul destinations. So let me start with IndiGo and Air India, and then I can possibly tell you about some of the other stories as well. But I think, as I said before, Bangalore and its location in the middle of the southern peninsula the fact that this is also, these 5 states contribute so much with respect to the economic growth of India, and the fact that there's so much outbound travel out of these places because of the growth of the middle class in all of these cities, rise in disposable income, etc., has made a number of these routes very, very attractive, especially on short haul, travel to holiday destinations. I think over the last few years, we've connected a number of places. Bali was interesting. I think IndiGo and Bangalore Airport had discussed that as early as 2019-20, and it was in the plan just before COVID happened. Of course, COVID then happened, and all bets were off, and the entire market took a hit. But they've come back. I think from their perspective, it's a very, very interesting route because it's a natural destination for most Indians. You don't need a visa as well to go to Indonesia and some of these Southeast Asian countries now. So I think that makes it hugely attractive. People can plan and go at short notice. So the flights have been going at well over 92-93% load factors, which is quite incredible for a sector like that. They've just announced Mauritius as well. That starts November 19th with 4 times a week service, if I'm not mistaken. And I think what IndiGo has done is very interesting in the sense that they're testing out many of these sectors also as sort of phase 1 before their A321 XLR start coming. And I think the LRs and XLRs start coming in next year, or let's say sometime in 25, 26. And I think the phase 1 has been to try and start testing many of these markets in terms of making sure they know what they can do with their 320s, what they can do with their current 321 fleet, so on and so forth. And I think that's very smart in the sense that they know what they can do. They know sort of what the operating costs are going to be like. They know where they can, make money, and which are starting to be some of the more attractive routes. The fact is that they concentrate many of these things out of Bangalore because they've got scale here. So they've got, like I said, over 60 destinations connected, even from a domestic perspective. And I think another point that very many people don't know about is that we've got about 23 to 25 cities within a 75-minute flying distance of Bangalore that are connected to BLR airport. So I think that helps in terms of being great feed as well into Bangalore. So that's also been a huge part of why many of these routes are successful. So there's a very strong origin destination market out of Bangalore, but equally there are 23 cities, 25 cities connected within that 75-minute flying time, which makes a lot of these things very, very successful. And I think, again, I'm not sure how many of your listeners are aware of this, but in North India, for instance, Delhi is almost, doesn't compete with any other airport. In the West, Bombay competes to some degree with Ahmedabad, but otherwise it's literally the only airport. Yeah. South India is far more interesting, right? I mean, in South India, we've got 16 airports that are very competitive, right? We've got 16 airports that are international. Yeah. And I think in that context, what we've done has been nothing short of incredible, which is why I say we've got the best airline marketing team available, because it's one thing if you're Delhi and Mumbai to go out and market yourself and say, come to Delhi and Bombay, because those are cities that have historically been very well served. Delhi NCR is about 30 million people. Bombay is probably in excess of 20 million people, but Bangalore is about 11 million people, 12 million people. And what the team has done is brilliant. So even from an international perspective, if you talk about long haul routes, in the last 5-6 years, we've connected a number of destinations. We connected Addis Ababa with Ethiopian. We then did Amsterdam through KLM. Even when Jet collapsed, KLM came in literally the month after Jet collapsed and started that service. We then had Lufthansa and JAL, which had announced, both of whom had announced Munich and Tokyo, and they were due to begin on 30th of March and 31st of March of 2020. But COVID again postponed those two things, but they've restarted, so that's great news. And then we connected Qantas to Sydney in September 2022. But the more interesting, or as interestingly, I think the North American story has been quite incredible. In January of 22, the airline marketing team and we all went out to North America to make a pitch to a number of the North American airlines. And normally these things take a lot of time, but I think they'd been watching India for a while, and it was the fastest turnaround in my sort of career. In 3 weeks after we'd visited North America, American called me in the middle of the night. I was traveling, and they said they were going to make the Seattle-Bangalore announcement, which was phenomenal. And of course, COVID and then the Ukraine war has put paid to that aspiration, because the airspace is close to American carriers, which is truly tragic, because 6 months after that, or even 3 months after that, United announced San Francisco, Bangalore. But what it also did was, I think it made Air India sit up and take notice. This was in the pre-Tata days. So I think Air India suddenly took notice of the fact that there's a market that's unserved. So on 11th of January 2021, Air India actually launched San Francisco, Bangalore, and that's the longest sort of route in their network. So it's not just IndiGo doing Bangalore, Bali, and pushing the envelope of what the narrow body can do. But we also have, I think, what I believe is one of the top 10 longest routes in the world, which is San Francisco, Bangalore, which is about 17 hours. And that's also been incredible because we are now connected to Australia, to Africa, to North America, nonstop out of Bangalore. 3 new continents in the last 5 years. And I mean, that's a story very few people talk about, even though it's an incredible story. So I think we've had Virgin come in earlier this year. And a lot of the airlines who came in with 3 and 4 times a week service are going to 5-6 times daily by this winter. So I think more than even getting new routes, what's been gratifying is the fact that the people who've started have found it very successful. They're increasing their frequency on these routes, and I think that's the first step. It shows how strong the market is. It shows how strong Bangalore Airport is. It shows how much work we do behind the scenes with all of these airlines. And the fact is that goes a long way in making sure that we can sustain that connectivity, making sure the routes are profitable, and making sure that the airline partners are happy. Because I keep telling the team and I keep telling everybody who wants to listen that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you can get the airline or not. You have to make sure that the airline is profitable on that route, because if they're not, they will withdraw the service. And I've seen that happen all over the world. So it is very, very important we get the right airlines, but it's as important or even more important that they're profitable when they operate that route. Because if they don't, or if they don't end up being profitable, I mean, that joy is short-lived and you will find that they will leave. So for us, I think what's been great is the fact that all of these routes are profitable. The airlines are doing well. And it's a vindication of the fact that we think that this is an incredibly strong market and a great airport to come to. And that domestic connectivity and the feed has been a very vital thing in terms of making sure that the routes are profitable. So I think that story is going to continue. So I'm super excited by it.
That's very interesting for me to know. When you're pitching to these airlines and going there as Bangalore International Airport, I'm keen to know what's usually the process like when you feel there is immense potential and you'd like, let's say, IndiGo to start this route to Bali or wherever else. Do you have to convince domestic airlines with equal vigor, if I may, put it like that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Vishal. So I think you've actually raised a very interesting point in this. So I think it brings 2 or 3 things into consideration. I think historically the only 2 airlines that had the only 2 Indian carriers that had wide-bodied aircraft in India have been Air India and Jet. I mean, Kingfisher had it for a short while, but so short that we can barely speak about it. But certainly, I think Air India and Jet had the metal, right, in terms of wide-body metal. And I think, like I said earlier, they went to, in the case of Air India, they were at Bombay for a long time, and then they moved to Delhi in around 2012 or 13, when Delhi airport convinced them that it was better for them from a capacity perspective, given Bombay's constraints, to move to Delhi. And then Jet, on the other hand, I think used Bombay as their principal base because they felt that they were well entrenched there, and it was a great market. And I think those 2 cities were historically our largest markets. So I think that was the case for a long time. So if you look at what where we started off, was that we really couldn't make pitches at that point to most of the Indian carriers because at that point Air India and Jet barely looked at us. I mean, they did that service to Brussels, but it was a one-off service, right? I mean, and then later the Brussels hub moved to Amsterdam. So I think they did it, but it was very limited, and I think Bangalore and the South were barely on their radar. I mean, they had sort of token service to Brussels or Amsterdam from Bangalore and from Madras for a while, but I think that was just so limited considering what the size of South India market was. So most of our pitches were to foreign carriers because we just didn't see the point in those days of going to the Indian carriers, because they sort of, for years, they ignored South India, not just Bangalore, but Bangalore, Madras, Hyderabad, Cochin, whichever airport you want to talk about, they ignored most of the airports. I think a lot of our efforts in those days were focused on the foreign carriers because we really believed that there was a very strong market, let's say from Bangalore to Europe or Bangalore to Australia or Bangalore to North America. And that still exists. I mean, if you look at our market between Bangalore and San Francisco, for instance, we should be having double daily service on Bangalore, San Francisco. On Bangalore, New York, we should definitely be having about 10 frequencies a week, given the size of the market. And those just are the two routes to start with. But certainly, if you look at Seattle, if you look at Chicago, if you look at some of the other places, there is a pretty strong case to be built up for the fact that you could have direct service to number of markets in North America. We could certainly have daily service to more than one market in Australia. We should be having daily service to Incheon, to a few more points in Europe, so on and so forth. Today we have triple daily service into London. I mean, it's not triple daily exactly. We have 19 frequencies a week, going to potentially 20 this winter. But there are a number of markets which have historically been very strong. And I think what we did in terms of going out and making the pitch was to go out and talk to each of these airlines about the strength of the market. And when we spoke about the strength of the market, I think it was not just about Bangalore and Bangalore Airport, even though that was the focus, but I think it was about the fact that South India is India's growth engine, and the fact that 30% of GDP is driven out of here. And therefore, there would be, very remiss to not look at it more strongly. And I think also timing was right. I think in the last 5 years, the India growth story has been fantastic. So India has been far more interesting to a number of carriers than it was historically. I think the post-COVID environment has also meant that, for instance, most of these carriers are looking at India as a long-term market. So if you look at Virgin and what they've done, if you look at some of the other carriers and what they're starting to do, American, United before COVID. I mean, United did so much into Delhi, they did Bombay, and they'd announced Bangalore. So I think it was a matter of time before they sort of started coming here pretty seriously. And I think it'll happen once. At some point, the Ukraine-Russia thing has got to sort of cool down, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But at that point, you will see the American carriers coming here in force. So I think from that perspective, definitely, our pitch to most of the foreign carriers and even the Indian carriers has been just the potential of what South India holds, the potential of what Bangalore Airport holds, the fact that there's unconstrained capacity, the fact that we've got world-class infrastructure, some of the best, what I would consider the best terminal in this part of the world, some of the best lounges, the fact that we've got a middle class here in Bangalore and South India that is very willing to sort of travel. The outbound travel out of this part of India is fantastic. The average GDP per capita numbers are very, very good. So you've got a number of people here with the wealth and the propensity to spend. And that means that the front of the cabin can be filled. And at the end of the day, from a long haul, ultra long haul perspective, you've got to be able to fill the front of the cabin. Right. And I think that the Bangalore market is, from a yield perspective, the strongest market in India. So there's a reason why Lufthansa puts the first class and the 748 into Bangalore. There's a reason why we've got very strong service from SQ with their flagship product. There's a reason why business and first out of Bangalore is always full and the fares are high. So we are in that scale now of being one of the 3 airports in India with that traffic level, and that certainly helps. So let's see what happens, but I think certainly very, very exciting times from a perspective of airline marketing and carriers coming here and things like that.
Satyaki, we'll have to take a pause for this week. I think there's so much for us to talk about. What I'll request you is to please come back next week and we'll continue that conversation.
Absolutely. I think it's been a great pleasure, Vishal. Very exciting to talk about Indian aviation with a fellow AvGeek and to know that it's there's so many people here who are so passionate about aviation. So I'm really looking forward to our next conversation.
The geeky pleasure is all mine. Today, the 6th of October, is also Satyaki's birthday. Warm wishes to him. This was a legit overtime issue because there was so much to unpack with him. We decided on a 30-minute conversation, but then kept going on and on and on, and it led to a 2-part conversation. It's been so insightful for me. It's been so insightful for me to understand things from an airport's perspective. Thank you to Satyaki for making this possible. And as always, As always, we are streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and all other major podcast apps. Do take out 30 seconds, rate us, and leave us a feedback. It helps. And with that, I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.